It is the sentence of the court to the charge of murder.
December nights in cities across America have a quiet way of revealing the cracks beneath ordinary life. A landlord sweeping a porch, a tenant carrying groceries up creaking stairs, two people passing each other in the hall with polite nods and forced smiles. On the surface, it looks simple: a property, a payment, a contract. But in the shadows of these ordinary arrangements, something far darker sometimes grows: power, control, entitlement, and a belief, however twisted, that the person who owns the property somehow owns the people living inside it. Tonight, we step into 10 cases where that belief did not just fester, it exploded. These stories do not begin with secret double lives or hidden criminal empires. They begin with rent disputes, petty arguments, noise complaints, and small amounts of money. They begin with frustrations over parking spaces, overdue payments, or demands for repairs. They begin with everyday tension, the kind nearly every tenant has experienced at some point. But in these 10 homes, under these 10 roofs, the landlords answering those conflicts did not reach for paperwork or mediation or the law. They reached for firearms, for knives, for shovels, for duct tape, for anything they could use to turn a disagreement into a killing. And the reasons they gave afterward, the justifications, the stories, the excuses, are some of the most shockingly trivial you will ever hear in a homicide case. Arguments over $100, noise in a shared driveway, requests for repairs, suspicions that were never real. In one case, a man killed because he believed his tenants were disrespecting him. In another, a landlord chopped up 2 young renters and stuffed their remains into suitcases that floated onto a beach. 10 landlords, 10 tenants. 10 moments when something small sparked something irreversible. These cases are brutal, they are senseless, and above all, they are preventable. If the people holding the power had chosen anything other than violence. Before we begin, take a breath. If you appreciate this calm, slow, cinematic way of telling true crime without sensationalism, make sure you subscribe. It helps keep the series alive, and it tells the algorithm you want more long-form, atmospheric storytelling like this. And while you are here, tell me something in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Every episode reveals a map in the comment section, viewers listening from every corner of the planet. And I want to know where you are joining us from as we begin this journey. Because our first case takes us to Brooklyn, New York. A dispute over rent, a frantic attempt to help a neighbor, and a landlord whose anger turned a small debt into a fatal encounter on a cold evening in East New York. January of 2013, East New York, Brooklyn. A cold wind pushes garbage across the cracked sidewalks as streetlights flicker over row houses with rusted railings. Inside one of those homes, a 63-year-old landlord named Phillip Estevez stands in a narrow hallway, his breath sharp with frustration. He grips a handgun in one hand. In the other, he holds the anger that has been burning inside him for days, over a debt so small most landlords would barely notice it. $100. That is the amount that sparks the fatal chain of events that will end a life before the night is over. The tenant in question is a woman named Ana Rodriguez. She is behind on rent in the home she shares with her family. Not months behind, not thousands of dollars behind, just $100. Estevez has been pressuring her, threatening her, escalating every conversation into something volatile. Neighbors will later describe him as someone who treated his building like a kingdom and his tenants like trespassers. He believed respect came with fear, and that night, he wanted both. Anna tries to calm him. She tells him she is trying to get the money. She tells him she will work something out. She tells him she just needs time. But the moment he pulls the gun, time runs out. A scream erupts from the hallway. It is not Anna's. It belongs to a neighbor. Luis Martinez, 58 years old, lives next door. He hears shouting, slamming, and the unmistakable tremor of a confrontation that has gone far beyond a simple rent dispute. Luis is the kind of neighbor people rely on. Someone who helps fix leaky pipes, someone who shares meals, someone who listens. When he hears Anna scream for help, he does not hesitate. He steps into the hallway. He calls out to Estevez. He tries to defuse the situation, but he never makes it more than a few steps. Estevez turns toward him, gun still raised. There is a flash of metal. A single shot cracks through the house. Luis collapses onto the hallway floor. The bullet hits him in the chest. He does not get back up. Moments later, chaos erupts. Anna flees. Neighbors pull open doors. Someone calls 911. Children cry from bedrooms where they hid from the sound of gunfire. Estevez does not run. In fact, he does something chilling. He stands over Luis, watching his body as if trying to understand how a man could die over a rent dispute that never should have escalated. When police arrive, they find Estevez at the scene. Officers order him to drop the gun. He complies, slowly, placing it onto the hallway floor. The weapon is still warm. Luis lies motionless at the bottom of the stairs. Investigators begin piecing together the timeline within minutes. Neighbors come forward quickly. They say Estevez had been pacing for days. They say he had been furious about Anna's late payment. They say the confrontation had been inevitable, that Estevez had been growing increasingly hostile, increasingly unpredictable, increasingly controlling. What shocks detectives most is how trivial the catalyst is. $100, not an eviction, not a legal dispute, not months of unpaid rent. Just a small amount of money mixed with a large amount of anger. Estevez is arrested on the spot. As he is led out of the building, wrapped in a heavy winter coat and handcuffs, neighbors gather behind police tape, shaken and unable to understand how a simple hallway confrontation turned into a homicide. Luis's family is devastated. He was a father, a neighbor, a man known for kindness. He did nothing except respond to a cry for help. He stepped into a hallway and never came back. The case moves quickly through the courts. Prosecutors outline a clear sequence of events. Estevez initiated the confrontation. He introduced the weapon. He escalated the violence. He fired the shot voluntarily. There was no struggle for the gun. There was no accident. There was no justification. Media coverage emphasizes how senseless the killing was. Articles describe Estevez as a man who snapped over a minor rent dispute. They describe Luis as a neighbor who simply tried to help. And they describe a community left in fear of the man who owned the property they lived in. The most haunting detail is the brevity of the violence. In less than a minute, a longtime neighbor went from hearing a scream to lying on the floor of a hallway, dying from a single gunshot wound. The landlord-tenant relationship is supposed to be transactional, a roof, a payment, a basic level of trust. But in this home, on this night, the power imbalance became deadly. A landlord felt entitled to enforce rules with violence, and a tenant's neighbor paid for that entitlement with his life. The story of Phillip Estevez is the story of power turned inward, of authority warped into aggression, and of a landlord who believed he could use a gun to settle frustration over something that barely exceeded the cost of a monthly phone bill. And while this case is horrifying on its own, the next one asks an even more unsettling question. What happens when a landlord's anger is not spontaneous, but builds for days until it erupts in a driveway confrontation that leaves a tenant dead on the pavement? October of 2014, Cheektowaga, New York. A crisp autumn wind rustles the last leaves clinging to neighborhood trees as dusk eases over a quiet residential street. In the driveway of a modest single-family home, 49-year-old landlord Thomas Szczesniak stands with his arms crossed, jaw clenched, waiting for his tenant to come home. He has been simmering for days. The tension between him and 43-year-old tenant Joseph Lawrence has built slowly at first, then sharply, like a pressure valve tightening with every small disagreement. By the time Joseph pulls into the driveway on the evening of October the 24th, the air is already thick with the weight of something about to break. Neighbors later describe seeing Szczesniak outside before the confrontation even began, pacing, muttering, gripping something inside his jacket pocket. He had complained about Joseph often, sometimes loudly, sometimes obsessively. A dispute over money, a dispute over expectations, a dispute over repairs. But beneath those arguments lay something more personal, a bitterness that grew each time Joseph pushed back or questioned him. When Joseph's vehicle rolls to a stop, the headlights spill across the driveway in a pale gleam. He steps out, unaware that these next moments will be his final minutes alive. What happens next is quick, too quick for anyone nearby to intervene. Szczesniak storms toward him, voices rise. Neighbors hear shouting, sharp, tense, edged with rage. One person later told investigators the tone alone made their stomach turn. Joseph tries to defuse the situation. He raises his hands. He tells his landlord to calm down. He tries to step backward. He tries to end the argument before it begins. But Szczesniak has crossed a mental line long before this confrontation. Something small, something so trivial no one remembers the exact detail, becomes the spark in a pile of weeks-old anger. Szczesniak pulls a handgun. The metal catches the faint porch light. Joseph sees it. He reacts on instinct, trying to turn, to duck, to put distance between himself and the weapon pointed at him. It is too late. A single shot cracks through the air, echoing across the houses in a violent burst that sends neighbors running to windows. Joseph collapses onto the driveway pavement, falling beside his parked vehicle, blood spreading quickly beneath him. For a moment, the entire street freezes. Somebody screams. Somebody dials 911. Somebody tries to rush to Joseph's side, but is held back by fear that Szczesniak may fire again. But the landlord does not flee. He stands over Joseph, breathing hard, eyes unfocused, as if unsure what he has just done. Witnesses say he looked dazed, confused, almost hollow. That expression becomes a central detail in the case. A man who did not run, who did not discard the weapon, who seemed shocked by the consequences of what he had chosen to do. When police arrive, they find Joseph unresponsive on the driveway. Officers attempt life-saving measures, but he is declared dead shortly afterward. Szczesniak is taken into custody without resistance. His weapon is recovered. The scene is secured under tape and flashing red and blue lights. As detectives reconstruct the timeline, the motivation becomes painfully clear. A landlord-tenant conflict that escalated far beyond anything rational. The reason for the killing was not self-defense, not some hidden criminal conflict, not a long-running violent feud. It was anger, frustration, pride. A landlord who felt disrespected and responded with fatal force. Investigative reports confirm there was no physical violence by Joseph before the shooting, no attempt to harm Szczesniak, no weapon found on the tenant. Every piece of evidence pointed to a simple truth. Joseph Lawrence died because his landlord could not control his temper. When the case reached the Bamliska courtroom, the atmosphere turned heavy. Family members filled the benches, holding each other tightly as prosecutors recounted the final minutes of Joseph's life. They spoke about how Joseph had been a hard-working, fair-minded man, how he had been trying to stabilize his living situation, how he had not deserved to die over a disagreement on a quiet driveway in a peaceful neighborhood. The prosecution charged Szczesniak with manslaughter in the second degree, a reflection of his reckless, unjustifiable actions. The defense attempted to argue heightened emotion, stress, and misinterpretation. But the evidence remained overwhelming. The gun, the neighbors' accounts, the lack of provocation, the one-sided escalation. The jury delivered their verdict, guilty, 5 to 15 years in state prison. The sentence struck many as simultaneously too long and not long enough. For Joseph's family, no span of years could ever bring him back. For the neighborhood, the idea that something as mundane as a tenant dispute could erupt into murder felt deeply unsettling. And as the years passed, this case became one more example in a troubling pattern across the country. Landlords who let minor conflicts metastasize into deadly confrontations. Because the truth is simple. A driveway argument should never end with bullet casings marked under yellow evidence cones. A disagreement about living conditions should never take a life. And no amount of anger ever justifies using a weapon against someone you are responsible for housing. Joseph Lawrence died trying to step out of his car. He died because a man in a position of power decided that being questioned was an insult worth killing over. The next case takes us south, to a desert city where a landlord's fury did not end with a single shot, but with the lengths a man went to hide a killing he committed with his own hands. May of 2016, Joplin, Missouri. The heat settles over the city like a heavy blanket as the sun sinks behind the scattered rooftops on South Jackson Avenue. In a small house painted in fading shades of cream, 61-year-old Anita Dunn finishes her day the same way she always does, tidying, resting, moving through small routines that keep life steady. She has lived here only a short time, renting the home from 54-year-old Todd Allan Greathouse, a man whose presence has begun to make her uneasy. Their relationship is tense, blurred by personal history, and darkened by a kind of pressure Anita has recently felt growing around her. On May 29th, that pressure reaches its breaking point. Greathouse arrives at Anita's home in a Volkswagen Beetle, parking awkwardly in front of the house. He walks to the door with a sense of purpose that later sends chills through investigators reviewing the timeline. He claims he came by only to talk, but the way he enters the home, uninvited, tense, quick, suggests that the conversation he wanted was not the one Anita intended to have. Inside, the two speak briefly. Voices rise. Neighbors hear bits of the argument through thin walls, though none can make out the words. Some hear Greathouse's voice, strained and sharp. Some hear a thump, and then, suddenly, silence. What happens in that silence becomes the center of the case. According to Greathouse's later confession, the argument escalates when Anita threatens to tell his wife about a past affair. Prosecutors would argue that this confession is really just a narrative designed to make the killing seem impulsive rather than deliberate. What is known for certain is this. Inside the living room, Greathouse places his hands around Anita's neck and begins to choke her. Anita struggles. She tries to pull away. She tries to breathe. She tries to scream, but her voice never reaches the street outside. Greathouse strangles her until she collapses to the floor, unconscious. That should have been the moment he stopped. Instead, he reaches for a lamp cord, looping it around her neck. He pulls until the final traces of life disappear. The brutality is intimate, controlled, and deliberate. And the moments immediately afterward reveal exactly what kind of man he is. Instead of calling for help, Greathouse begins planning. He drags Anita's body across the floor, out of the living room, toward his car. He loads her into the Beetle, wraps a rope around her body, and binds a heavy rock to her frame. The process takes time, but time is something he believes he now has because he thinks no one will find her. He drives out of the city, following the rural back roads west of Joplin until he reaches the entrance to an abandoned mine shaft, a site known to locals, hidden behind brush and gravel. It is quiet, remote, a place where secrets are meant to stay buried. Greathouse drags Anita's body from the vehicle down the slope toward the dark pit. He pushes her into the shaft. Her body sinks beneath the water, pooled at the bottom. He leaves her there. He drives away. 2 days later, on May 31st, police question him. He lies, he denies, he claims Anita was alive when he last saw her. He insists someone else must have harmed her. His composure is unsettling to detectives. He does not appear shaken, he does not appear frightened, he appears annoyed, as though the investigation is an inconvenience. On June 1st, everything changes. Search teams discover Anita's body deep in the mine shaft, the ligature marks on her neck, the binding, the rock, the condition of her remains, all tell a story more honest than Greathouse's shifting statements. News spreads quickly across the community. A missing woman has become a homicide victim. The following day, June 2nd, detectives confront Greathouse with the evidence. His story collapses. He breaks. He confesses. He walks officers through the crime, the choking, the cord, the car, the mine. He reenacts the disposal, showing them the road he took, the path he walked, even where he stood when he pushed her into the water. To investigators, it does not feel like remorse. It feels like inevitability. At trial, prosecutors dismantle every claim he made. They reveal the confession. They present the physical evidence, the lamp cord, the bindings, the mine shaft photographs. They detail the timeline. The lie on May 31st, the discovery on June 1st, the confession on June 2nd. They show the jury forensic proof that Anita did not die quickly. They describe a killing rooted in control, not panic. The defense attempts to argue that Greathouse acted in fear of blackmail, but the legal burden is too great, the motive too absurd, the brutality too calculated. The jury deliberates for just 27 minutes. Guilty. First-degree murder. The judge sentences Greathouse to life in prison without parole. Anita's family sits in the gallery, their grief settling like dust across the polished courtroom benches. For them, there is no relief, only finality. What makes Anita's death so devastating is not only the violence, but the trust she placed in a man who had access to her home and her life. She believed he would treat her fairly. She believed living under his authority was safe. It was not. And while Anita's story ends in the remote silence of an abandoned mine, the next case in this series moves us to the Pacific Northwest, to a rented room outside Seattle, where two young tenants seeking a place to live found themselves in the home of a landlord whose cruelty would be discovered only when the tide pulled their remains to shore. August of 2020, Burien, Washington. A gray marine layer hangs over Puget Sound as gulls circle the coastline and early morning joggers move along the waterfront. A few miles inland, in a modest rented house on Ambom Boulevard, 58-year-old landlord Michael Lee Dudley stands at his front door, staring at two of his tenants, 27-year-old Jessica Lewis and 27-year-old Austin Wenner, with a coldness that neighbors would later describe as unsettling. Money is tight, tensions have risen, a rent dispute has turned into something uglier, heavier, more dangerous. Jessica and Austin have been renting a single room in Dudley's home. They are young, hopeful, trying to build a life together. But behind the closed door of their rental space, conflict has been brewing. Accusations about noise, accusations about money, accusations about obligations that Dudley insists they have failed to meet. He is a landlord who sees rules as weapons, a man who feels disrespected easily, a man who keeps threats close at hand, like tools he might someday use. That day arrives in late June, inside a small bedroom with peeling paint and a single window facing the street. According to witness testimony and court records, Dudley confronts Jessica and Austin violently. He demands money. He accuses them of stealing. He screams that they need to leave. But leaving is not enough for him. He wants to punish. He wants to control the narrative. He wants to remind them that this house, this narrow, dimly lit space, belongs to him. The argument escalates quickly. The sound of violence erupts behind closed doors. A neighbor later tells investigators he heard Jessica's voice, frightened, pleading, then a gunshot, then silence. Jessica Lewis dies almost instantly. Austin Wenner is shot shortly afterward. What Dudley does next sends shockwaves across the entire Puget Sound region. He does not call police. He does not call for help. He does not check if either victim is alive. Instead, he dismembers their bodies. For days, he works inside the home, cutting apart the remains of the two young tenants who had trusted him for shelter. The act is gruesome, methodical, and deliberate. Court documents later describe it as one of the most disturbing crime scenes in recent local history. Dudley places the remains into plastic bags, sealing them with tape, preparing to dispose of them in a way he believes will erase all evidence. But the ocean always gives back what people try to hide. On June 19th, teenagers filming a TikTok video on Alki Beach in West Seattle approach a suitcase washed ashore at the edge of the rocks. The smell hits them before the truth does. They open the lid. Inside are human remains. Police arrive within minutes, shutting down the beach, combing the waterline. Over the next few days, additional bags wash up or are recovered from the water, each containing more of Jessica and Austin. The discovery stuns the city. News spreads like wildfire across national outlets. Two bodies, dismembered, dumped in suitcases, found by children. It is the kind of crime that seems impossible to reconcile with the quiet, coastal calm of Seattle's western shore. As investigators trace the remains back to Burien, suspicion falls quickly on their landlord. When detectives first knock on Dudley's door, they find him oddly calm. His house smells of bleach. Carpets have been removed. A bedroom floor shows signs of repair. The story he offers is vague and contradictory, but the blood evidence, the forensic timeline, and witness statements tell a far clearer story. Witnesses report hearing a loud argument days earlier. One person reports Dudley saying the couple owed him money. Another tells police that Dudley admitted he shot them. His own daughter later confirms that he seemed agitated and paranoid in the days following their disappearance. Search warrants uncover bullet holes in the walls, blood in the bedroom, and attempts to scrub and conceal evidence. Forensic teams confirm the room where Jessica and Austin lived is the primary crime scene. Dudley is arrested on suspicion of murder. The trial begins in 2022. Over several weeks, jurors hear testimony about Dudley's violent behavior, his financial disputes with tenants, and the chilling steps he took to hide the killings. Prosecutors describe the crime as cold-blooded and calculated. emphasizing how Dudley manipulated his position as landlord to exert control over vulnerable renters. The jury finds him guilty of 2 counts of murder in the second degree. In January of 2023, Dudley is sentenced to 46 years in prison, effectively a life sentence given his age. In the courtroom, Jessica's family reads statements describing her as kind, artistic, full of laughter, someone who brought joy wherever she went. Austin's family describes him as hardworking, protective, fiercely loyal. Their families sit side by side, united in grief, bound by the unimaginable cruelty of a landlord who turned a shared home into a place of terror. The community struggles to understand how a rent conflict, the kind thousands of people experience every year, turned into a crime so disturbing its aftermath washed onto a public beach for children to discover. The answer lies in a pattern we have now seen again and again. A landlord feeling challenged, a tenant drawing boundaries, and a man with power deciding that violence is easier than negotiation. Jessica and Austin's deaths became a national symbol of the dangers renters can face behind closed doors, where financial leverage becomes emotional leverage and anger can turn a landlord into a predator. And yet, as shocking as this case is, the next story moves us nearly halfway across the country, to Battle Creek, Michigan, where a landlord's paranoia turns into a deadly rampage that leaves an entire home soaked in fear and silence. October of 2020, Battle Creek, Michigan. In a 2-story house at 203 Post Avenue, a landlord and his tenants are days away from a double homicide that will end with bodies hidden in an abandoned garage, and a judge later deciding that the man responsible will never walk free again. Living in the basement is 53-year-old Chad Allan Reed. Upstairs live 34-year-old Joseph Joey Soul and his girlfriend, 31-year-old Jacqueline Jackie Leopard. Reed owns the house. Joey and Jackie rent from him. According to police and family members, there had been ongoing confrontations between them about money and noise in the weeks before the killings. On October 7, 2020, there is another argument. In his later statement to investigators, Reed claims that Joey threatened him with a knife during a confrontation on or near the porch. He says he responded by pulling a gun and firing. What is not in dispute is the outcome. Joey is shot and killed. Jackie runs. Detectives later testified that Reed told them he shot Joey, then turned the gun on Jackie when she tried to escape. He followed her to the backyard. There, he attacked her. According to police and court testimony, Reed admitted that after firing at her, he beat Jackie, struck her in the head, and strangled her until she died. An autopsy later confirmed that Jackie died from strangulation, with additional blunt force injuries to her head and face. Both tenants were now dead. Joey from gunshot wounds, Jackie from a combination of beating and strangulation. Reed did not call 911. He did not seek help. Instead, he tried to hide what he had done. Investigators say he wrapped the bodies and initially hid them at the Post Avenue property. He then placed them in his pickup truck and moved the truck to an abandoned garage not far away, leaving the couple's remains concealed there while family and friends were searching for them. For several days, no one outside that garage knew what had happened. Friends and relatives grew increasingly alarmed when they could not reach Joey or Jackie. According to reporting and court records, they had not been heard from for about 5 days when their loved ones contacted Battle Creek Police to file a missing persons report. Officers went to 203 Post Avenue to check on them. The house, at that point, showed no obvious sign of a struggle from the outside, and the couple was nowhere to be found. Shortly afterward, a tip came in, pointing investigators toward Reed. He then phoned the department's tip line himself and came in, where, according to police, he confessed to killing both tenants and to hiding their bodies. Guided by Reed's admissions and their own investigation, detectives located Joey and Jackie's remains in the abandoned garage where the truck had been left. Reed was arrested and charged with 2 counts of open murder and multiple firearm offenses. Before trial, he underwent a competency evaluation and was found competent to stand trial. In court, prosecutors laid out the sequence: ongoing disputes over money and noise between Reed and his tenants, an argument on October 7th, Reed shooting 34-year-old Joey Soul, Reed then pursuing 31-year-old Jacqueline Leopard into the backyard, beating her and strangling her, and finally, his efforts to move and hide both bodies. Reed's statements about self-defense were presented to the jury, but jurors did not accept them. In October 2023, a Calhoun County jury found him guilty of second-degree murder in Joey's death and first-degree murder in Jackie's death, along with multiple firearm charges. On December 8, 2023, Battle Creek Circuit Court Judge Sarah Lincoln sentenced Reed, now 56 years old, to life in prison without the possibility of parole on the first-degree murder conviction and a consecutive term of 125 years on the second-degree murder conviction. At sentencing, the court noted not only the killings themselves, but also Reed's treatment of the bodies and the impact on the victims' families. Jackie's sister said publicly that they were relieved he would never be free again. After the murders, the house on Post Avenue where all three had lived caught fire multiple times in a series of suspected arsons and was eventually demolished. What remains now are the documented facts. A landlord and two tenants sharing a house, documented disputes over money and noise, a confrontation, Joey shot dead, Jackie chased, beaten, and strangled in the yard. Their bodies hidden in a truck and abandoned garage, a confession, and a life without parole sentence. Nothing about that story needs embellishment. January of 2022, Norwalk, Connecticut. A cold winter afternoon settles over a quiet suburban street lined with modest homes and bare trees scratching at the sky. Inside one of those homes lives 70-year-old landlord and local political figure Ellen Wink. She is a former deputy registrar of voters, someone known in town hall, someone who attends community events, someone with a public-facing life that suggests stability and structure. But behind the doors of her home on Nelson Avenue, she has been locked in a long, bitter dispute with her tenant, 54-year-old Kurt Lametta. Their landlord-tenant relationship has deteriorated over months, and every record of it, police calls, eviction paperwork, statements from both sides, tells the same story. Tension that grew into resentment that boiled into something far darker. For Ellen Wink, this conflict becomes all-consuming. By early 2022, she has attempted to evict Lametta multiple times. She has accused him of not paying rent. She has accused him of damaging the property. She has accused him of locking her out. Court filings show that Lametta accused her of illegal lockouts, changing locks without notice, shutting off utilities, entering the property without permission. Police records confirm officers were called to the residence more than once to mediate escalating arguments between the two. What began as a housing dispute has become a feud. On January 20th, the conflict reaches its breaking point. Shortly after midday, neighbors hear a commotion inside the house. The sound is sharp, brief, and unmistakable. Gunfire. Inside, investigators later confirm, Ellen Wink confronts Lametta in the basement apartment. She shoots him multiple times. Law enforcement officials state that when officers arrived, they found Lametta deceased on the floor, having suffered several gunshot wounds. Wink is still at the scene. When officers ask her what happened, she tells them she was acting in self-defense, that she feared him, that he had threatened her, that she had no choice. But the physical evidence does not support her story. According to the arrest affidavit, Lametta was unarmed. He had no weapon on him. There were no signs he had attacked her, no injuries on her consistent with struggle, and nothing in the basement indicated a violent confrontation initiated by the tenant. What police do find is a landlord who went downstairs during an eviction dispute carrying a firearm. Wink is arrested on the spot and charged with murder. The news, spreads quickly through Norwalk. A sitting public official, someone who worked inside city government, is accused of killing her tenant over a dispute that had already gone before housing courts and the police multiple times. In the days that follow, more details come to light. Court documents outline years of disagreements between the two. Neighbors describe hearing arguments over rent and utilities. Some describe Wink as frustrated and increasingly volatile in the months before the shooting. Others recall Lametta himself being vocal about the conflict, saying he believed Wink was trying to force him out with constant pressure. What none of them imagined was that the dispute would end in gunfire. In 2025, after multiple delays and an extensive review of evidence, a Connecticut jury is asked to decide whether Wink acted reasonably or used deadly force without justification. Prosecutors present the facts plainly. The autopsy shows Lametta was shot multiple times. Ballistics and crime scene photographs confirm that he was not advancing in a threatening manner. No weapon was recovered. There is no evidence of an attack on Wink. They argue that she initiated the confrontation, she brought the gun, she fired the shots, and the dispute that preceded the killing, months of tension over payments, access, and eviction, shows a motive rooted not in fear, but in anger and control. Wink's defense team tries to frame the shooting as a desperate act, claiming Lametta had become increasingly hostile. But under cross-examination, none of this is supported by physical evidence. After deliberation, the jury finds Ellen Wink guilty of murder and criminal lockout, a charge that underscores the history of property disputes leading up to the killing. In 2025, she is sentenced to 50 years in prison. For a 73-year-old woman, the sentence is functionally a life term. At the sentencing hearing, members of Lametta's family speak about the man they lost, a father, a friend, a familiar face in the community who was trying to maintain stability despite months of conflict with his landlord. They describe their confusion at how something as ordinary as a rental dispute could escalate into fatal violence. The judge, in reading the sentence, emphasizes the responsibility that comes with being both a landlord and a public official, a person with authority, a person with power, a person who chose to use that power not through legal channels, but through a firearm. The courtroom is silent except for the sound of Lametta's family weeping. As Wink is led away in handcuffs, the community is left grappling with a harsh truth. This was not a crime fueled by chaos or impulse. It was a collision of power, control, and resentment that grew over months, perhaps years, until one person decided the courtroom was too slow and took the law into her own hands. Most landlord-tenant disputes end in paperwork, hearings, negotiations. This one ended in a basement with the sound of gunshots that marked the end of a life. And as devastating as this case is, the next one shifts us back to New York, to Queens, where a landlord walked into a police precinct and calmly told officers he had a problem with his tenants. What they found inside his home would reveal one of the most disturbing crime scenes of the year. November of 2023, St. Albans, Queens. The morning begins quietly inside the 113 precinct on Merrick Boulevard. Officers file paperwork, answer phones, and settle into the rhythm of an ordinary shift. Then the front door opens, and a 54-year-old man walks in, calm, steady, almost detached. His name is David Daniel. He is a landlord, and within minutes, detectives will learn that he has come to the precinct to confess something almost too horrific to believe. Daniel approaches the desk. He tells officers he has problems with his tenants. He says they have been causing trouble. He tells them he cannot take it anymore. And then he adds the words that freeze the room. They are not alive anymore. Officers react instantly. Daniel is separated, detained, and questioned. Another team is dispatched to his home on 116th Avenue, a two-story house where Daniel lives on the upper floor and rents out the lower unit to two tenants. What police find inside is not a dispute, not a fight, not the aftermath of a struggle. It is a triple homicide scene. Inside the home, officers locate the bodies of two of Daniel's tenants, a man and a woman, both stabbed multiple times. In a separate area of the home, they find the body of Daniel's girlfriend, also dead from stab wounds. According to police, the killings occurred recently, within a window of hours, not days. Crime scene technicians move through the house with cameras, markers, and protective suits. Blood trails paint a sequence more clearly than words ever could. Furniture is overturned. A kitchen knife appears to be the murder weapon. Every room tells the same story. Violence delivered quickly and repeatedly. What officers do not find is any sign of forced entry or any indication that the victims attacked Daniel. The evidence suggests they were caught off guard, inside their own home, by someone who had full access to the property and full control over their living situation. Daniel is taken back to the precinct for a formal interview. He repeats much of what he said earlier. He insists he was frustrated with the tenants. He claims they were disrespectful. He mentions arguments, noise, disagreements that escalated over time. Detectives note his flat tone. No visible panic, no distress, no confusion. The way he talks feels less like a confession and more like a complaint. He offers no self-defense claim. He does not say the victims threatened him. He offers no explanation for why his girlfriend was killed. He simply states that he lost control. The Queens District Attorney's Office moves quickly. Daniel is charged with 3 counts of murder, along with weapons charges related to the knife used in the killings. At arraignment, prosecutors call the case brutal, unprovoked, and evidence of extreme violence. Court documents later confirm the victim's injuries: multiple stab wounds, deep penetrating trauma, and signs consistent with a sudden and overwhelming attack. Neighbors react with shock when the news becomes public. Those who knew the tenants describe them as quiet, hard-working, respectful. A neighbor who lived next door says she never heard any violent disputes, only occasional disagreements typical of shared housing. Others say Daniel had grown more withdrawn in recent months. Some mention seeing him argue with the tenants about rent, noise, or household responsibilities. But no one imagined it would escalate to murder. One neighbor sums up the disbelief simply, "You never expect a landlord to do something like this." As investigators dig deeper, they uncover a timeline showing rising clashes between Daniel and the tenants, arguments that became more frequent and more heated. But nothing in the case file suggests the victims were violent. There is no history of them threatening Daniel, no reports of physical altercations. What emerges is a familiar pattern: a landlord who felt challenged, overwhelmed, or disrespected, and who responded by using the deadliest force possible. The killings capture attention across New York City, not because they are the first landlord-tenant killings the city has ever seen, but because of the speed, the brutality, and the almost clinical way Daniel walked into a precinct to announce what he had done. While the case moves through the courts, Daniel remains held without bail. As of the latest public reporting, he has not yet been convicted, and his case continues in the Queens criminal court system. Prosecutors have signaled they will pursue the highest charges possible. For the families of the victims, the legal timeline offers little comfort. 3 lives were taken, 2 tenants, and the woman Daniel lived with. 3 families now face holidays, milestones, and everyday routines without the people they loved. One relative of a victim told local press, "They were just trying to live their lives. They trusted him. They thought they were safe." But the truth, repeated again and again in stories like these, is that danger often hides behind familiarity. A landlord holds a key: access, authority. And when that authority transforms into anger, tenants can be trapped in a space they cannot escape. The house on 116th Avenue becomes a haunting symbol, a reminder that power combined with resentment can turn lethal faster than anyone realizes. What unfolds next is a descent into a home that looks safe from the street, a quiet 2-story house framed by roses and white curtains. Nothing about it warned neighbors that inside lived a woman capable of cold calculation and unspeakable cruelty. Dorothea Puente projected the image of a kind, aging lady, someone who baked pies, offered advice, and opened her doors to those who needed a roof. But behind that gentle exterior, she hid a hunger for control, money, and ultimately, death. Her story begins decades earlier. Born in California in the late 1920s, Dorothea endured a childhood of neglect, addiction, and abandonment. By the time she entered adulthood, she had already shaped herself into a survivor who used deception as easily as breath. She cycled through identities, marriages, and arrests, shifting masks whenever necessary. Fraud became her constant companion. And yet, no one could have predicted the level of darkness she would eventually embrace. By the early 1980s, Dorothea had built a reputation as a caretaker for the elderly and the vulnerable. She rented rooms to those who had nowhere else to go: the homeless, the mentally ill, the disabled, the forgotten. She made sure social workers saw her as a savior, someone who dedicated her life to helping others. Her home was filled with soft lighting, vintage clothes, and the warm voice of a woman who appeared harmless. But appearances, as always, were her greatest weapon. Her first known victim during this period was a woman named Ruth, who moved into Dorothea's home seeking companionship and safety. Within weeks, Ruth fell mysteriously ill. Dorothea told police she believed it was suicide, a tragic ending to a troubled life. Investigators accepted her explanation. She was, after all, the caregiver, the one who helped the helpless, the one who always smiled. But Ruth had not taken her own life. She had been poisoned. The pattern continued. In the mid-1980s, an elderly woman named Leona moved in after recovering from a medical episode. Dorothea quickly obtained control over her finances, presenting herself as a trustworthy guardian. Within months, Leona vanished. No farewell, no trace, no explanation. When her body was finally uncovered years later, it carried the unmistakable signature of deliberate poisoning. Then came the man who would unravel everything. His name was Bert. He was in his early 50s, developmentally disabled, and deeply trusting of Dorothea. Social workers checked on him regularly, relying on her soft reassurances that he was thriving. But when one social worker noticed inconsistencies, missed appointments, strange excuses, a feeling that something was terribly wrong, she refused to look away. Her persistence became the first crack in Dorothea's carefully built facade. Police visited the home on a calm November morning in 1988. At first, their search was gentle, almost casual. Dorothea appeared cooperative, even offering them tea. But in the backyard, officers noticed patches of disturbed soil. Curious, they began to dig. The first body appeared 30 minutes later. Dorothea did not wait for them to find the rest. She slipped away quietly, walking out the front door, claiming she needed to run an errand. Instead, she disappeared into the city, leaving detectives staring at a yard that held far more than one grave. By the end of the search, 7 bodies had been unearthed. All elderly, all vulnerable, all poisoned, all buried in shallow or concealed graves just steps from her back door. A nationwide manhunt followed. She was eventually found in a motel, living under yet another false name. When officers confronted her, she simply sighed, as if inconvenienced rather than caught. Her trial became a long, grueling spectacle. The evidence revealed a chilling pattern. She targeted those who depended on her most, drugging them until they could not resist, stealing their benefit checks, and burying them as though their lives held no meaning. She had built her reputation on compassion while using it as a mask for murder. Though prosecutors sought to prove 9 killings, she was ultimately convicted of 3. Yet the weight of the remaining victims never lifted from her story, for their graves told a truth the courtroom could not erase. Dorothea spent the rest of her life in prison, maintaining her innocence until the day she died. She never expressed remorse, never confessed, never acknowledged the terror she inflicted on the people who trusted her with their final days. What makes her story linger is not only the violence she committed, but the ease with which she concealed it. She showed us that true danger does not always shout. Sometimes it bakes cookies, smiles from a doorstep, and claims to protect the vulnerable while quietly preparing their graves. And yet, the next case on our journey is even more complex. One that unfolds not from argument or long-standing feud, but from hate. A case in Illinois where a landlord, driven by rage and prejudice, targeted tenants whose only offense was their identity. October of 2023, Plainfield, Illinois. A quiet cul-de-sac sits under a crisp autumn sky as fallen leaves drift across driveways and children play on front lawns. In one of the neighborhood's rental homes lives a small family, a mother, 32-year-old Hanan Shahin, and her 6-year-old son, Wadea Al-Fayyumi. Their landlord, 71-year-old Joseph Czuba, lives on the same property, in an arrangement that puts them physically close, and eventually, dangerously close. According to court records and police statements, the relationship between the family and Czuba had been strained for days. The tension was driven not by rent, not by repairs, not by noise, but by something far more volatile: the landlord's growing anger over news coverage of the Israel-Hamas conflict. Authorities would later say Czuba became fixated, convinced that his tenants, Palestinian-American, Muslim, posed a threat. There is no evidence this fear was grounded in reality. Investigators stated clearly that the victims had done nothing to provoke him. The morning of October 14th begins unremarkably. Hanan prepares breakfast. Wadea plays. Nothing suggests the violence that will unfold. But outside, Czuba is growing agitated. Statements later taken from his wife reveal he had spent the morning consumed by political news. He talked about being afraid. He talked about danger. He talked about the tenants downstairs. Eventually, according to police reports, he grabbed a military-style knife and went to their door. Hanan opens it. What happens across the next moments is brutal. According to the Will County Sheriff's Office, Czuba forces his way inside. Hanan tries to flee with her son, running toward the bathroom. She dials emergency services while holding the phone with trembling hands. The call captures her screams, a frantic plea that she is being attacked by her landlord, that he is stabbing her, that her child is in danger. When deputies arrive minutes later, they find a scene that will haunt them for years. Blood smeared along the hallway, deep stab wounds across Hanan's torso and face, and 6-year-old Wadea lying on the bedroom floor. He has been stabbed 26 times. Hanan, gravely injured, identifies Czuba as the attacker before she is taken to the hospital. She survives, her son does not. Officers find Czuba sitting outside near the driveway, injured but alive. He refuses to speak. The knife, later confirmed as the murder weapon, is recovered from the home. Prosecutors charge him within hours. The charges include first-degree murder, attempted murder, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, and hate crime enhancements motivated by the family's Palestinian identity and Muslim faith. The case draws national attention instantly, not only because the victim is a child, but because of the motive. A landlord driven by extremist fear, fueled by geopolitical events thousands of miles away, attacking people who had done nothing but rent a room on his property. Details from the medical examiner's report confirm the extent of the violence. Wadea's wounds are numerous, deep, and delivered with force. Hanan's injuries are severe but survivable, stab wounds to her abdomen, face, and arms, consistent with her attempting to shield her son from the attack. In the days after the murder, community members gather outside the home carrying candles, flowers, and small toys. A 6-year-old boy, described by teachers as cheerful, curious, and endlessly kind, had been killed by the man entrusted with providing shelter. The case moves toward trial, but before it reaches a verdict, something happens. In February of 2025, after protracted legal proceedings, Czuba is found guilty of first-degree murder for Wadea's death, attempted murder for the attack on Hanan, aggravated battery, and hate crime counts that elevate the severity of the charges. At sentencing, the court hears testimony from Hanan, who speaks in a quiet voice about the terror of that day and the pain of losing her child. She describes Wadea as her best friend, as a boy who loved soccer, drawing, and picking flowers from the yard. Her words move the courtroom to silence. In May of 2025, Czuba receives a sentence of 53 years in prison, a term that will keep him incarcerated for the remainder of his life. The judge emphasizes that the crime was fueled by hatred, irrational fear, and prejudice, calling it one of the most senseless acts he had ever seen in his courtroom. Outside the courthouse, members of the local Muslim and Palestinian communities gather with signs calling for compassion, unity, and protection for families who simply want to live safely in their homes. The rental house in Plainfield becomes a symbol, not of landlord-tenant conflict over rent or repairs, but of how fear and prejudice can turn deadly when combined with power and proximity. For Hanan, the aftermath is a long stretch of recovery, both physical and emotional. She carries stab scars that will never fully fade. She carries the memory of a child lost too soon. And she carries the knowledge that the man who murdered her son lived only feet away for months. As for Czuba, he shows little remorse in court. His statements remain flat, offering no explanation beyond the paranoia investigators had already documented. This case stands apart in the series because the motive is not rooted in money, eviction, or housing disputes. It is rooted in hate, a landlord who allowed misinformation and prejudice to distort reality until he transformed a quiet home into a crime scene. And yet, our series has one more chapter. A case from Milwaukee in 2025 where a landlord's violence unfolded across 2 crimes. Scenes in a single day, taking the lives of a tenant and an innocent witness before abandoning a child miles away. November of 2025, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The temperature has dropped sharply overnight, and a layer of frost clings to the windows along North 35th Street. Inside a rented bedroom of a multi-unit home, 39-year-old Terrence Wilder sleeps in a space he has been renting from 54-year-old Kevin Griffin. Witnesses later describe Griffin as volatile in the days leading up to what happens next, pacing, muttering, irritated by small things. Nothing suggests the scale of the violence he is about to unleash. On the morning of November 5th, police will later say, Griffin enters Terrence's bedroom with a firearm. There is no argument, no struggle reported, no attempt at negotiation. Griffin fires repeatedly. Terrence is struck multiple times and collapses onto his bed. According to the criminal complaint released by Milwaukee County prosecutors, Terrence dies at the scene from gunshot wounds delivered at close range. But Griffin is not finished. Inside the home is a second person, a 31-year-old woman named Anya Raymond. She is not a tenant. She is a visitor, someone who happened to witness the shooting. According to later interviews and charging documents, Griffin realizes she has seen everything. He forces her toward the doorway. She pleads. He does not stop. He shoots her too. Anya collapses in the hallway. She is still alive. She begs Griffin not to hurt her child. But the details get even more disturbing. According to investigators, Griffin orders Anya to get into a vehicle with him. Terrified and bleeding, she complies. Her young child, too young to understand the terror unfolding, is placed in the vehicle as well. Prosecutors later say Griffin drove Anya away from the crime scene, stopped several blocks away, and shot her again, killing her. He then left her body in a yard. Her child, unharmed but traumatized, was found miles away, abandoned in a stranger's driveway, crying and alone. The discovery triggered immediate emergency calls from residents who had no idea why a child had been left on their property. From there, Griffin fled. For hours, Milwaukee police searched the city. The alert went out. 2 homicides, an armed suspect on the run, considered extremely dangerous. Officers canvassed neighborhoods, reviewed surveillance, tracked the abandoned vehicle, and warned the public not to approach him. It did not take long for investigators to identify him. He was the landlord, he lived in the building, and the witnesses who discovered Terrence's body immediately identified Griffin as the shooter. By late afternoon, authorities located Griffin and took him into custody without incident. But what they found on him deepened the horror. According to prosecutors, Griffin was carrying a handgun and a kill list, a handwritten set of names that included both. The victims. The list indicated premeditation, names selected, listed, and carried with intent. In the initial hearing, the district attorney stated plainly, this was an execution of 2 people. The charging documents include 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, 1 count of attempted first-degree intentional homicide, armed kidnapping, child neglect, and weapons charges. The courtroom is silent as the prosecutor reads the allegations. The words feel heavy. Brutal. Terrence Wilder killed in his own rented bedroom. Anya Raymond, an innocent bystander, killed because she happened to be present. Her child abandoned on a stranger's property. In the days that follow, friends and family members speak publicly about the victims. Terrence is remembered as a man with plans, a man trying to build stability, a man whose life ended in the room where he slept. Anya is remembered as a mother, a sister, a woman caught in the wrong place at the worst possible moment. Her family describes the nightmare of learning she had been killed and her child left miles away, terrified and alone. Investigators emphasize that nothing about the killings suggests self-defense, provocation, or a struggle. Terrence was shot in his bed. Anya was shot for witnessing a crime. Her child was left in a driveway with no explanation, no safety, no adult to protect them. Community leaders respond with grief and anger. 2 lives lost, a child traumatized, a neighborhood shaken. Milwaukee police call it one of the most disturbing landlord-tenant homicide cases they have seen in recent years. As Griffin awaits trial, prosecutors continue building a case that appears airtight. The key evidence includes witness statements, ballistics linking him to both murders, surveillance footage showing his vehicle leaving the scenes, the handwritten kill list, and forensic results connecting him to the abandoned child. With the charges he faces, Griffin could receive life in prison if convicted. For now, the case moves through the Milwaukee County court system, with Griffin held on an extremely high cash bond. Judges cite the extreme danger to the community. The violence was fast, planned, horrifying, and, according to prosecutors, entirely intentional. The house on North 35th Street stands quiet now. The sirens are gone, the tape is down. The rooms where Terrence and Anya spent their final moments sit still behind locked doors, illuminated only by fragments of winter sunlight. Tenants pass each other in the halls of rental homes across the country every day, people with no reason to fear the person who owns the space they live in. But this case, like everyone in this series, asks the same unsettling question. What happens when the landlord is the threat? And with this final case, our journey through the most violent landlord-driven killings comes to an end. The stories you have heard tonight travel from coast to coast, cities, suburbs, cul-de-sacs, neighborhoods where life should have been ordinary. 10 landlords, 10 homes, 10 people who held the keys to someone else's safety and used that power to destroy it. What ties these cases together is not just the violence, but how small the spark often was. A disagreement over rent, a personality clash, a moment of anger, a prejudice that lived quietly until the day it did not. Each victim woke up believing they were safe in their own home. Each trusted that the person who owned the property would treat them with basic decency. Each believed that disputes would end in paperwork, conversations, or courtrooms, not in gunfire, beatings, strangulation, or execution-level cruelty. But the truth is quieter than any headline. When control turns into entitlement, when resentment turns into obsession, when fear or hate grows unchecked behind closed doors, the most dangerous person in the building can be the one who collects the rent. If you want more of these long-form, calm, cinematic documentaries, stories told slowly, respectfully, and without exaggeration, make sure you subscribe. It keeps this series alive, and it tells the algorithm that you value true crime told with care, not chaos. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? The comments on these videos always draw viewers from every corner of the map. Let me know where you are, your city, your country, your time zone, and how far this story traveled to reach you. And tell me one more thing. Which case stayed with you the longest? Which landlord do you believe embodied the very worst of the power they held? Your answers shape the next episode and the next story we tell together.